All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling phenomenology.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a branch of philosophy that, well, it can get pretty complex.
Mm.
So we're going to unpack it together.
Sounds good.
And to help us out, we'll be using the phenomenology entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
I like it.
Really fantastic resource.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's going to help us grasp how phenomenology explores, really, the way we experience the world.
Yeah, and it's not even just about understanding like what we experience,
Right.
but how we experience it.
Okay.
Phenomenology gets at like the structures of consciousness itself, right? How we even perceive and make meaning of the world around us.
So let's start with the basics.
Sure.
What exactly does phenomenology even mean? I know it's got something to do with phenomena, but it feels like there's more to it than just that.
Yeah, you're right. It's a bit more nuanced than just like things happening, you know?
Right.
In phenomenology, phenomena refer to how things appear to us.
Okay.
Yeah, or even how we experience them. And this includes the meanings they hold, like in our own experience.
So can you give an example?
Yeah, so like think about it this way.
Okay.
If you see a tree, right, you're not just passively registering a visual image, you're actually experiencing that tree.
Right.
Within a whole context of like meanings and memories and associations.
Yeah.
Like it could remind you of climbing trees as a child
Mm.
or, even just providing some shade on a hot day.
Right.
And all of that is the phenomenon of the tree.
Oh,
It's how it appears to you in that very moment.
so it's not just about the sensory input, but the entire web of meaning that we kind of bring to our experiences.
Precisely, yeah.
Right.
And that's where this concept of intentionality comes in. It's a key principle in phenomenology.
Got it.
And essentially what it means is that consciousness is always directed towards something.
Okay.
Our experiences, they're always about something.
Like, I'm not just thinking right now, I'm thinking about phenomenology.
Exactly.
Like, my consciousness is directed towards this topic.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
All right, good.
And, the way we direct our consciousness, how we interpret and engage with these, like, objects of experience,
Yeah.
that's where the real richness of phenomenology comes in.
This is already starting to feel like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here.
Yeah.
So how do phenomenologists actually study this? It's
Yeah.
not like they can put consciousness under a microscope.
Right. It requires a different approach.
Yeah.
Phenomenologists use various methods
Okay.
to investigate conscious experience.
Hmm.
One way is through reflecting on our own past experiences.
Hmm.
And this isn't just casual reminiscing, though. It's
Yeah.
more about systematically examining
Oh.
like how we've perceived and interpreted things,
I see.
really looking for patterns and structures in those experiences.
So it's almost like conducting a deep dive into our own memories, trying to understand the underlying structure of how we experience the world.
Yes, a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Another method phenomenologists use is interpreting experiences by
Yeah.
placing them in their context.
Right.
For instance, imagine trying to understand someone's experience of fear.
Okay. Yeah.
To fully grasp it, you really need to consider the specific situation, their cultural background, even their personal history with fear.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, our experiences aren't isolated events.
Exactly.
They're shaped by this whole web of factors.
Exactly. And then there's the method of analyzing the form or the structure of an experience.
Okay.
This involves kind of breaking down an experience into its fundamental components.
Right.
Like, for example, let's say you're watching a flock of birds fly overhead.
Okay.
A phenomenologist might analyze this experience in terms of the eye who is perceiving, the act of perception itself, like seeing,
Right.
and the object being perceived, the birds.
Got it.
You see?
Yeah, so it's about understanding the building blocks of experience.
Yes.
The different elements that come together to create our conscious awareness of the world.
Precisely.
Okay.
Now, it's important to remember that phenomenology didn't just appear out of thin air.
Right.
It has a rich history.
Yeah.
With roots stretching back centuries.
Okay.
But it really took shape as a distinct discipline
Right.
in the early 20th century.
All right, let's trace those roots.
Okay.
Where did phenomenology begin, and who were some of the key figures who helped it evolve?
Well, we can't talk about phenomenology without mentioning Franz Brentano.
Yeah.
He was a 19th century philosopher.
Right.
He's not strictly a phenomenologist,
Okay.
but his work was hugely influential.
So how does he fit in?
Well, he developed this concept called descriptive psychology,
Yep.
which focused on describing mental phenomena as they appear to us
I see.
without making assumptions about their underlying causes.
So instead of asking why do we experience fear, Brentano was more interested in describing like the experience of fear itself.
Exactly. And this emphasis on describing experience,
Yeah.
on taking the subjective viewpoint seriously, that's key. Okay.
And it carries over into phenomenology.
Okay.
Now, the figure who really put phenomenology on the map is Edmund Husserl.
Right. I've heard that name before.
He's often considered like the father of modern phenomenology.
Right, Husserl. He's the one who came up with those sometimes tricky terms
yeah.
like noesis and noema, right?
Yes, those were some of his key contributions.
Okay.
But before we get into those,
Yeah.
it's important to understand that Husserl was deeply influenced by Brentano.
Okay.
He took that idea of descriptive psychology and kind of developed it into a more rigorous and systematic method for studying consciousness and intentionality.
I can see how that kind of builds on Brentano's work.
Right.
But why did Husserl think it was so important to develop such a rigorous method for studying consciousness?
Well, Husserl believed that to truly understand experience,
Okay.
we needed to examine both its subjective and objective dimensions.
Right, break that down for me.
So the subjective dimension
Yeah.
is our personal first-person experience.
But he also recognized that there's an objective dimension to our experiences. These are the meanings and concepts that shape our understanding of the world, even though they exist beyond our individual experience.
So like my experience of a sunset is subjective, but it's also shaped by the objective concept of a sunset,
Exactly.
which exists like independently of my perception.
Exactly. Husserl argued that these objective meanings, these noemata, as he called them, are crucial for understanding how we grasp and engage with the world.
Okay.
In fact, he saw the theory of intentionality that consciousness is always directed towards an object
Right.
as a broader application of the theory of linguistic reference.
Linguistic reference.
Yeah, think of it this way.
Okay.
When we use language, we use words to refer to things in the world, right?
Yeah.
The word tree isn't the same thing as a tree,
Right.
but it points to,
Yeah.
it refers to the concept of a tree.
So the word has a meaning, a sense,
Yeah,
that allows us to connect it to the actual thing in the world.
precisely. And for Husserl,
Okay.
our experiences work in a similar way.
Hmm.
They refer to objects in the world through their content or meaning, through their noema.
So Husserl is basically saying that to understand experience, we need to understand how our minds create meaning,
Yes.
how they connect our subjective perceptions to objective concepts in the world.
You got it. He was bringing logic and meaning into the picture when studying consciousness, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
Yeah, I can see that.
And those terms you mentioned earlier, noesis and noema,
Right.
they're all about unpacking the structure of how we create meaning.
So we've got Brentano setting the stage with descriptive psychology.
Yeah.
And then Husserl comes along and develops this rigorous method for studying consciousness, bringing logic and meaning into the mix.
Exactly.
This is already a lot to digest, and I have a feeling we're just getting started.
You're right about that. There are so many other fascinating figures and perspectives within phenomenology.
Can't wait to get into them.
Yeah,
But maybe it's a good place to pause for now.
sounds good.
Let's take a break and come back to explore some of those other perspectives in part 2.
Looking forward to it. So, picking up where we left off, it's really incredible how phenomenology, even with this shared foundation, has led to so many diverse interpretations.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, different thinkers taking those basic principles and building these unique philosophical structures on top of them.
I'm really starting to see that. So where do we go next in our phenomenology journey?
Well, we talked about Husserl and his method,
Right.
but let's kind of delve a bit deeper into his specific approach.
Yep.
He called it transcendental phenomenology, and it was aimed at, really understanding the very conditions that make knowledge and consciousness possible in the first place.
That sounds incredibly ambitious. Like, how do you even begin to tackle a question that big?
Well, Husserl believed that to get to the core of conscious experience, we need to strip away all our assumptions about the world. And he called this method epoche.
Epoche.
Yeah, often translated as bracketing.
Bracketing. Is that like putting all our beliefs about reality on hold?
Yeah.
Like suspending judgment about whether things actually exist?
Exactly. It's like hitting the pause button on our usual way of thinking about the world.
Okay.
And focusing solely on the structure of our experience, how things appear to us,
Yeah.
without worrying about whether those appearances correspond to an external reality or not.
So instead of asking, does this table exist?
Right.
We ask, how am I experiencing this table?
Precisely. Husserl believed that by setting aside these existential questions, we could gain a clearer understanding of the essential structures of consciousness. Those fundamental ways in which our minds kind of make sense of the world.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see how this could be like a powerful tool for understanding experience.
Yeah.
But did everyone in the phenomenology camp agree with this transcendental approach?
Not entirely.
Wow.
One of Husserl's most famous students, Martin Heidegger,
yeah, I've heard of him.
he took a different path.
Interesting.
He felt that bracketing the world was a mistake.
Really?
Yeah. For Heidegger, our very being is fundamentally intertwined with the world.
Okay.
Like we can't separate the two.
Heidegger always strikes me as the kind of thinker who, like, challenged the status quo.
He definitely had his own unique perspective,
Yeah.
He emphasized this concept of being in the world,
Okay.
arguing that our experiences are inseparable from our practical engagements
Right.
with the world around us.
Yeah.
He even went so far as to call phenomenology fundamental ontology,
Whoa.
shifting the focus from the structures of consciousness to the question of being itself.
Ah, yes. Being with a capital B.
Right.
That's diving into some deep philosophical waters.
Heidegger loved those deep waters. He believed that to truly understand our existence, we need to understand the meaning of being.
Right.
And he saw phenomenology as the key to unlocking that mystery.
So we've got Husserl focused on the transcendental, trying to understand the conditions for any experience whatsoever.
Right.
And then we have Heidegger, who's more grounded in the everydayness of being in the world.
That's a good way to put it.
It's fascinating how these different interpretations kind of re-emerge from the same basic principles.
That's the beauty of philosophy. And the next figure we need to discuss, Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh, Sartre.
Yeah, he adds another fascinating layer to the mix.
Okay.
He developed what he called phenomenological ontology,
Okay.
arguing that consciousness is always a consciousness of something.
Sartre, the existentialist philosopher.
Yes.
The one who wrote all about freedom and responsibility.
That's the one. Sartre argued that there's this fundamental difference between the being of consciousness, which he called being for itself, and the being of objects, which he called being in itself.
So being for itself versus being in itself.
Right. Consciousness is always aware of something, always directed towards an object, while objects just are...
So for Sartre, consciousness is about being engaged with the world, like making choices, taking action, while objects are just kind of there passively existing.
You could put it that way.
Right.
Sartre's phenomenology was all about exploring this dynamic interplay between consciousness and the world.
Yeah.
And how it shapes our experience of freedom and responsibility.
Okay, so we've got Husserl's transcendental phenomenology.
Right.
Heidegger's being in the world.
Yeah.
And now Sartre's focus on this interplay between consciousness and objects.
Right.
Each of these thinkers is taking a slightly different angle on phenomenology.
Exactly. And there's one more key figure we need to include in our phenomenology all-star team.
All right, who is it?
Maurice Merleau-Ponty.
Merleau-Ponty.
He brought the body back into focus,
Oh my God.
challenging the traditional Cartesian mind-body split that had dominated Western philosophy for centuries.
Merleau-Ponty. Wasn't he the one who wrote about the lived body?
Yes. He argued that our bodies aren't just physical objects.
Right.
They're the very medium through which we experience the world. We don't perceive the world from like a detached, objective standpoint.
Okay.
We experience it through our senses, our movements, our interactions with our environment.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, our bodies are how we literally move through and experience the world.
Yeah.
It's not like we're just disembodied minds floating around.
Exactly. And for Merleau-Ponty, the body isn't separate from the mind. It's an integral part of how we perceive, think, and interact with the world. He emphasized the idea of the body schema.
Body schema.
Which is like our pre-reflective, embodied sense of our own bodies and their position in space.
It's like when you reach for a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You don't consciously think about all the muscle movements involved.
Right.
You just reach, and your body knows what to do.
That's a great example. Merleau-Ponty would say that this kind of embodied knowledge is fundamental to our experience of the world.
So we've got this incredible lineup of thinkers,
right?
Each with their own unique take on phenomenology.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about how all of this connects to other areas of philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, philosophy is like this giant interconnected web of ideas.
You're absolutely right. Phenomenology has some fascinating connections to other branches of philosophy. Take epistemology, the study of knowledge, for example.
All right, knowledge. How does phenomenology fit into that?
Well, phenomenology helps us understand the very foundations
Oh, okay.
of knowledge claims
Mm,
by clarifying how we experience and perceive the world.
right.
It provides a grounding for our claims about what we know.
Okay.
Before we can claim to know something,
Yeah.
we need to understand how we're experiencing it in the first place.
So if I claim to know that the sky is blue,
Right.
that claim is based on my experience of seeing the sky as blue.
Exactly.
And phenomenology helps us like unpack that experience
Yeah.
to understand its structure
Right.
and how it leads to knowledge claims.
Exactly. It's about understanding that relationship between experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
And what about logic?
Okay. Logic.
Remember how Husserl brought logic into his phenomenological framework?
Yeah, he did.
Well, phenomenology also helps us understand the intentional force of meaning,
Okay.
including the meanings expressed in language and logical reasoning.
So how do we know if a logical argument is valid? I guess it depends on how we're understanding the meanings
Right.
of the terms and propositions involved,
Exactly.
which is something phenomenology can shed light on.
You got it. Phenomenology can help us understand the very act of thinking, of reasoning,
Yeah.
and how that act is shaped by our experiences and our understanding of the world.
This is all starting to feel very interconnected.
Right.
Like every branch of philosophy we touch upon
Yeah.
has some tie back to phenomenology.
It does.
It's really like a central player in the philosophical game.
Absolutely. And we can't leave out the philosophy of mind,
the philosophy of mind.
where things get especially interesting when we
Yeah.
consider the mind-body problem.
This feels like a perfect cliffhanger.
Right.
The mind-body problem and how phenomenology tackles this age-old debate.
Yeah.
Let's save that juicy topic for part 3.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into phenomenology. And as promised, we're tackling one of the biggest philosophical puzzles out there, the mind-body problem.
It's a classic, you know. It's a classic for a reason.
Right.
For centuries, philosophers have debated this relationship between the mind and body. Like, are they two distinct substances, as Descartes argued?
Yeah.
Or is there a more, unified way to understand them?
Yeah, the idea of dualism with
Okay.
the mind and body as these separate entities.
Right.
It's always been a tough one for me, to be honest.
It is.
How can something non-physical, like thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
interact with something physical, like the brain and nervous system?
Yeah.
It feels like this philosophical tug of war.
It definitely presents a challenge. And this is really where phenomenology kind of steps in
Okay.
with a fresh perspective.
Right.
Remember, phenomenology emphasizes the importance of experience,
Yeah.
how things appear to us.
Yeah.
So when we approach the mind-body problem from this phenomenological perspective, we kind of shift the focus away from these metaphysical questions about substance.
Okay.
We start by looking at how we actually experience our own minds and bodies.
So instead of getting stuck in these debates about what the mind is, we focus on what it's like to have a mind,
Exactly.
to experience the world through our senses, thoughts, and emotions.
Precisely. Phenomenology reminds us that we can't ignore the subjective first-person perspective when trying to understand the mind. It's not just about mapping brain states
Right.
or figuring out the neural correlates of consciousness. It's about grappling with the qualitative feel of experience, what philosophers sometimes call qualia.
Qualia.
Yeah, the redness of red, the taste of chocolate, the feeling of pain.
Qualia, those raw, subjective feels. That seems so difficult to capture in purely physical terms.
Exactly. It's like,
It's like trying to explain the taste of an apple to someone who's never tasted one.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's precisely why phenomenology is so relevant to the mind-body problem.
Okay.
It forces us to confront the reality of these subjective experiences, these qualia, which can't simply be reduced to brain states or computational processes.
I'm starting to see how phenomenology can really shake things up in the philosophy of mind.
Yeah.
Like it's injecting this dose of lived experience
Yeah.
into a field that can sometimes get a little too abstract and theoretical.
You're right. Phenomenology challenges those purely materialist views
Yeah.
that try to explain the mind solely in terms of physical processes.
Yeah.
It reminds us that there's something unique and irreducible about conscious experience, about what it feels like to be a thinking, feeling being.
So if we're not going for this purely materialist explanation, then where does that leave us? How does phenomenology actually help us understand the mind-body connection?
Well, it doesn't necessarily offer a definitive solution, but it does provide a really valuable framework for thinking about the issue. Remember Merleau-Ponty
Yeah.
and his concept of the lived body?
Yes, the body as we experience it, not just as this physical object.
Right. Merleau-Ponty's work highlights how our experience of the world is fundamentally shaped by our embodiment. We don't perceive the world from this detached, objective standpoint. We experience it through our senses, our movements, our interactions with our environment.
So our bodies aren't just containers for our minds.
Right.
They're active participants in the process of experiencing and understanding the world.
Precisely. And this embodied perspective offers a way to bridge the gap between mind and body without resorting to dualism.
Okay.
It suggests that the mind isn't a separate substance, but rather an emergent property of our embodied interactions with the world.
Okay, that's starting to click for me.
Yeah.
It's like the mind and body are two sides of the same coin, intertwined in a way that I think we're only beginning to understand.
That's a great analogy. And phenomenology, with its focus on experience and embodiment, gives us this really powerful set of tools for exploring this complex relationship. It encourages us to look at the mind-body problem not as this metaphysical puzzle to be solved,
Right.
but as a lived reality to be investigated and understood.
This deep dive has been incredible.
It's been fun.
We've explored the core concepts of phenomenology,
We did.
traced its historical development,
Yeah,
and even tackled the mind-body problem.
that was a big one.
But as with most philosophical explorations, I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
You're absolutely right. Phenomenology is this vast and multifaceted field.
Yeah.
So much to offer.
So for our listeners who are now, really intrigued by phenomenology,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway? What do we hope they'll remember from this exploration?
Well, if there's one thing to take away from phenomenology, it's this. Never underestimate the power of your own experience. The way you perceive the world, the meanings you find in it, the way you interact with your environment. These are all valuable sources of insight, not just for philosophers, but for anyone seeking to understand themselves and their place in the world.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that philosophy isn't just about abstract theories.
Right.
It's about understanding the human experience in all its richness and complexity.
Exactly.
And phenomenology, with its emphasis on lived experience and the structures of consciousness, offers this unique and powerful framework for doing just that.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
A huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this fascinating journey. And to our listeners, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world of ideas. Until next time, happy philosophizing.